Hello, America. I'm Eric Erickson. Here are the 4 things you need to know this afternoon for June 24th. We break down the headlines you need to know from a conservative perspective with no spin, just the facts and some thoughtful analysis. Let's get right to it. The big story out of the Middle East is the ceasefire brokered between Israel and Iran, ending a 12-day conflict that had the world on edge. Well, as of now, the tender peace is holding. President Donald Trump, once again, with the center of the attention, he announced complete and total peace. Again, it's holding. Now, let's be clear. This isn't just about two nations. When Israel and Iran go to war, the world pays attention. Oil prices, global markets, and American security are all in play. Donald Trump, working the phones and leveraging relationships, got both sides to the table. Iran confirms it's acceptable. Israel has agreed, but only if Iran stops attacking. There are a lot of skeptics, and rightfully so. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is no pushover. He's not going to let Iran off the hook if Tehran keeps stirring the pot. Trump's deal gives both sides a window to wrap up ongoing operations, and then the ceasefire, we'll see where it goes. Right now, though, it's holding. In the Middle East, ceasefires are fragile. Donald Trump's leadership here is significant. The real test is whether this holds for a while or whether we go back to square one in just a week or two. From a conservative perspective, this is what strong American leadership looks like. It's not an endless war. It's not nation building. It's clear red lines and a willingness to use American power to leverage peace. We also know that peace in the Middle East is never easy. We should be prepared for the possibility that more action, not just talk, might be needed down the road. Let's talk about the economy, because what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. In fact, we've got some data out there, and it's multifaceted, from manufacturing in oil prices to toy prices. Oil prices in the ceasefire. Oil tumbled nearly 5% on Tuesday after news of the ceasefire broke, and President Trump says he's got no problem with China continuing to buy oil from Iran. Brent crude is now under $70 a barrel, back to where it was before Iran's initial strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Why does it matter? Well, because energy is the lifeblood of the global economy. When oil prices spike, everything else gets more expensive. Gas, groceries, you name it. Investors are breathing a sigh of relief. Asian and American stock markets are up. The S&P 500 is less than 1% off its all-time high. The Nasdaq is climbing. The Dow is too. The reason? Lower oil prices mean lower costs for businesses, which mean less pressure on prices and hopefully less inflation. But there is a catch. As I keep mentioning, the ceasefire is fragile. If it breaks down, oil prices could go right back up. The U.S. economy can't afford another oil shock right now, especially not with inflation already a concern. President Trump's tariffs are putting pressure on prices. More on that in a minute. So another oil spike would be a double whammy. Speaking of whammies, Jerome Powell spoke before Congress today. He testified. Donald Trump has been critical of Jerome Powell for not cutting interest rates fast enough. Here's the thing. The Supreme Court just reaffirmed the Fed's independence. Jerome Powell knows his job is safe. Donald Trump just can't fire him over a policy disagreement. Powell says the economy is solid. There's low unemployment, strong labor markets. Inflation's above 2%, however. He's cautious because of trade policy, particularly those tariffs. It's causing uncertainty. They want to see, and by July should have some idea. Speaking of tariffs, let's talk about something every parent is noticing. Toys are getting more expensive. They jumped up 2.2% between April and May, far outpassing overall inflation that was at 0.1%. Why? Because 3/4 of toys sold in the U.S. are made in China, and Trump's tariffs are making them more expensive to import. Toy companies like Mattel and Hasbro are warning of more price hikes and even shortages. They're trying to move production out of China, but it's not easy. Tariffs are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they're supposed to protect American jobs and push companies to make things here. On the other hand, they're raising prices for consumers and creating uncertainty for businesses, some of which are finding it's still cheaper to manufacture abroad and pay the tariff than to repatriate the business and manufacturing line to the United States. We want a strong, resilient, self-reliant America, but we also have to be honest about the costs. Tariffs can be a useful tool, but they're not a magic wand. We need to make sure we're not hurting American families in the process, and right now the data suggests we might be. Now let's turn to national security. ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service, just arrested 11 Iranian nationals across the United States in a 48-hour operation. Details are still coming out, but this is a reminder immigration enforcement matters, especially when it comes to national security. Early reports are that at least one of the men had Hezbollah ties. This is why we need strong borders and robust enforcement. Iran's a state sponsor of terrorism. The idea that people with ties to Iran could be in the U.S. illegally or overstaying visas is a real concern. We need to know who's coming into our country, and we need to be able to act when there's a threat. This is not about demonizing immigrants. It's about protecting Americans. We can be a nation of immigrants and we can still have secure borders. ICE work here is a good example of why enforcement is necessary. It's also worth noting these people came here because of Joe Biden, not because of Donald Trump. They and others like them have been living here for some time, not just in the last 48 hours. Finally, we need to talk about the housing market. It's another warning sign for the economy. Most homeowners now are finding themselves underwater, meaning they owe more on their mortgages than their home is worth. That's happening in places like Austin, Texas and Cape Coral, Florida, where prices soared during the pandemic and now are coming back down, sometimes by as much as 20%. This is a warning sign. When people are underwater on their mortgages, they can't refinance. They're more likely to default if times get tough. Lenders aren't eager to help either because they don't want to take on more risk. This is why we need to be careful with government intervention in the housing market. Too much easy money, too many incentives to buy, and you end up with bubbles. When these bubbles pop, regular folks get hurt. We need a housing market that's stable and sustainable, not one that's propped up by reckless policies. That means responsible lending, realistic expectations, and letting the market correct itself when it needs to without a government bailout. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, the Middle East is still a tinderbox, but a strong American leadership is making a difference. The economy is doing okay, but tariff and oil price wildcards are necessary to watch. Strong borders and national security go hand in hand with smart enforcement, and that's happening, and we're finding illegal alien Iranians. Thank you, Joe Biden. And the housing market is starting to send warning signals. We don't need to repeat the mistakes of 2008, 2009. These are your 4 things to know this afternoon. I'm Eric Erickson. Thanks for listening. Remember, the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. Please consider subscribing to the podcast, checking us out on YouTube, subscribing there at EW Erickson on YouTube. Stay informed, stay engaged, and above all else, please, keep the faith.